I have lived experience with OCD. I had intrusive images about my baby girl being kidnapped or trafficked or hurt by strangers somehow, somewhere. I knew enough about myself not to create any extensive rituals, except I did create one compulsion. I didn't know this was OCD until I was hired by NOCD, and I didn't even know that OCD could ever even apply to me. I had only seen representations of OCD on that show Monk, and it really seemed like something that only happened to professional white people who just really wanted everything to be really, really clean. I want to put the power back in your hands. I believe that if we as individuals know more about OCD from our own cultural context, if we can see it in our own language, using examples from our own lives, then we can screen ourselves and our loved ones for help. We can also advocate for ourselves in order to seek proper care with an OCD specialist. Hi everyone, my name is Saraa D. I'm a licensed clinical social worker as well as a clinical supervisor here with NOCD. I'm here to introduce our series, Shades of OCD. This video series is a part of our ongoing commitment to ensure that OCD education is inclusive, diverse, and accessible for everyone. I want to start out by telling my own story so that you have a chance to meet me and understand my motivation for hosting this series. I knew I wanted to be a therapist when I was just 16 years old. I was an academic decathlon nerd, and that year we were studying philosophy, psychology, and religion. And I remember with so much joy studying Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs. And once I sort of got that, psychology was a study not just of people, but of people's problems, and then how to actually solve them, I was sold. And I was determined to learn as much as I could so that I can help people, including myself. I think it's important to share that I have lived experience with OCD. When I was a child, I remember feeling the urge to ensure that any sensation on one hand was matched by a sensation on the other hand. If my right hand brushed against something cold, then I wouldn't really feel right until my left hand also brushed against something cold. I also felt the urge that I had to tap each finger an equal number of times in order to feel, normal. These habits were early signs of OCD, but nobody in my family or my community knew what to watch out for. I would portion my food into smaller bits and eat them in little patterns. I would have a feeling that inanimate objects would feel guilty if I did not touch them or look at them equally to others. I did stand out as a child. My family thought I was slow to complete tasks, and people noticed that I would kind of either space out or hyper focused on things often, but no one knew that these were specifically signs of OCD or really any need for any kind of emotional or psychological support. So as you can hear, I already had some patterns. But then my family went through this really painful transition after my parents divorced and my mom became sick. So from around the age of 9 on, my mother was no longer able to parent me. And after that, the obsessions and compulsions became so much more heavy and felt so much more dangerous than the ones I've already described. These peaked between the ages of 10 and 16. I felt that I needed to keep certain objects, sometimes for years, so that I wouldn't be condemned by God. I had intrusive, taboo images about Jesus and family members. I had a special routine phrase that I needed to say every single night so that my dad and I would not die as we slept. I had rules about what numbers I could set the TV volume on, and sometimes they got me into trouble because I would make the TV volume at an acceptable number that was way too loud because the next lowest acceptable number was way too low. This certainly caused issues for me at home. I would also cut my hair if I ever felt it was uneven or I saw one little split in. I remember really trying to avoid cutting it or trying to resist, but the feeling would just be so overwhelming that I just felt like I had to snip and snip and snip until I felt better. It's also like whenever my hair was straightened, if any one little tiny section got curly again, anywhere along the edges, which is normal, I would just get so upset and like disturbed that I wanted to just wash my whole hair because it wasn't just right. And I grew up poor and the salon cost a lot of money and a lot of time, and my dad had to take me back and forth. So I wouldn't wash it, but instead I would just put it up into a really, really tight bun. And if anybody touched my hair or disturbed it from the exact way I had it styled, I would just feel so overwhelmingly disturbed and just feel like it was ruined. And again, I would just, tighten the bun up even more. So, I could just avoid the feeling that it wasn't just right. Hair is really important in the Black community, all the different styles. And people would often remark that my hair was so thick and so big and so healthy, and they really wanted me to wear it out. But I just kept it away so that no one would touch it and I wouldn't have to feel that suffering feeling that it was wrong. As you can hear from my story, I certainly suffered from many different subtypes, themes of OCD. You can hear just right or perfectionism OCD. You can hear that I had taboo thoughts and religious OCD thoughts. But when I grew up, I also suffered from what I'm currently calling racism OCD. And further research is going to have to determine what exactly this subtype is. But I thought if I could just act right, speak right, look presentable, go in with the right energy and the right attitude, that I wouldn't suffer from racism. And we know that that's not how that works. I'm also a mother. And so after I gave birth to my daughter, I had intrusive images about my baby girl being kidnapped or trafficked or hurt by strangers somehow, somewhere. I knew enough about myself not to create any extensive rituals, except I did create one compulsion in order to cope with the painful thoughts. And it was that every single time I picked her up, I just kissed her. Every single time, without exception. Because this was my way of reassuring myself that she would be safe in this world and that I was doing my very best. And while I couldn't control everything, I could control loving her and protecting her. Since I'm clearly being super candid, I also want to share that I have experience with contamination OCD and other OCD. I promise I'm not being Mrs. Me Too. This is the norm. OCD tends to be chronic and it tends to shapeshift in so many different ways. And I want to emphasize that when I was a child, I was going through this completely alone. I just felt like I was doomed and I was so depressed and I didn't have anybody to talk to about these things. When I became an adult, I was able to access therapy, but the therapist didn't really know what this was. At worst, they just ignored it. And at best, they were able to identify that I had anxiety, but they missed the nuance that I was trapped in this cycle of compulsions in order to manage the anxiety-provoking thoughts. I felt trapped. Despite not getting any professional help with this, I was able to make do because I used different tips and tricks I learned over the years to try to manage the emotions. I didn't know this was OCD until I was hired by NOCD to go through the extensive training process to become a specialist in the treatment of OCD. And as I was sitting in the lectures, I just became so overwhelmed with shame and embarrassment because I got to this point in my career without knowing that I was living with OCD. Some of the time, I'm a great learner. I learn quickly, but a number of the answers, I was able to get them right because I really deeply understood it because I had been living with it. I felt like it made me a bad therapist, that I missed this all these years. I mean, I knew I had all these thoughts and feelings and I was on top of therapy, but I just didn't know I needed a certain kind of treatment. And I didn't even know that OCD could ever even apply to me. I had only seen representations of OCD on that show Monk, and it really seemed like something that only happened to professional white people who just really wanted everything to be really, really clean. I'd never seen it on a person of color. And so here we are today. I created the Shades of OCD series because we all deserve better. I have an excellent education in psychology. I earned a BA in Psych from Pomona College. I became a Fulbright Scholar after college, and then I went on to earn a master's degree at UCLA. I had thousands of hours of experience, but even I never saw myself in any of the examples of OCD that I'd come across. And real talk, it's because the textbooks assume a standard or normal person. And that standard normal person is a white American middle-class person. But that is not the world at all. The entire rest of the world is not centered in any of this education, unfortunately. And this very narrow, tiny view of humanity still dominates our textbooks and our education. And this has caused us to be pushed aside, mistreated, or totally ignored by the mental health field. And so, with the help and support of NOCD, I want to put the power back in your hands. I believe that if we as individuals know more about OCD from our own cultural context, if we can see it in our own language, using examples from our own lives, then we can screen ourselves and our loved ones for help. We can also advocate for ourselves in order to seek proper care with an OCD specialist. These videos are so that everybody can see themselves in the examples and seek help as soon as possible. Being a Black person, an Indigenous person, an Asian person, a person of color, a gender-expansive person, a person of the global majority should not mean that you have to take a back seat and suffer when there are very helpful interventions that can help you reclaim your life. Thanks for hanging with me. I will see you in the next one.